Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Let us have the sincere intentions taken in this lesson, lillahi ta'ala. So before we dive in to the obligations and continuing with the obligations of a sentence, let us build off what we mentioned last time, which is the creed. So it's obvious that Allah does not exist in a time. So, but the Wahhabis, they don't necessarily know that. That is because the Wahhabis, they do not know that the most particular attribute of God is that He has no beginning, and that the most particular attribute of the creation is that it has a beginning. So the Wahhabiyya have attributed time to Allah. So they argue that Allah starts and stops and begins and ends by using this word verse. إن ربكم الله الذي خلق السماوات والأرض في 6 أيام ثم استوى على العرش. They say it means, surely your Lord created the heavens and earth in 6 days. ثم, translating literally as then, he rose above the throne. So they explained ثم as then, expressing sequence and delay. And this only happens with objects. Happens when objects, such as me and you, are bounded by time, are bounded by space, by dimensions. Again, this is blasphemy because it likens weakness to Allah. And whatever has a weakness, it is not worthy of being worshipped. One and two is a creation. So the scholars answered, thumma can also mean and, meaning that it might come without being for a sequence or delay. So it may also be said, if this verse gives the meaning of sequence, the only thing being put in order here is the mere information, right? So that Allah informs us about the creations of the earth, of the, of the heavens and earth, and then he informs us about his istiwa. That does not mean Allah changed. As we mentioned in the previous course, istawa means to conquer, to dominate. And both of those answers can be shown by this verse of the Quran. خلقكم من نفس واحدة ثم جعل منها زوجها. So he created you, humans, from one soul, which is Adam alayhi salam. And then he created from that soul its spouse, Eve. So if thumma here is taken literally, it would mean that humans were created before their mother Eve. And this is impossible. So likewise, Allah did not physically rise above the Arsh at a time after the creating the skies and earth. This is impossible. So had they had the proper creed of the eternal creator, even if they had the proper Arabic language, and they studied the language, they would humble themselves, they would not have said such a thing. The true meaning is, and we're talking about Istella here, is according to the affirmation possibilities that we mentioned, which is conquer, to subjugate. And these things are attributed with power. Because again, the Al-Arsh is the ceiling of paradise, and it is the biggest creation. Okay, so now let us continue with the obligations and the sense of the tongue. I don't think there's any obligations, it's just sins of the tongue. So the author said, among the sins of the tongue is to give a false testimony. So explanation. Doing that is an enormous sin, and to point that the Prophet ﷺ drew similarities between this sin and taking partners with Allah. So the Prophet did not mean that to give a false testimony takes one out of Islam. No, he means that this is an enormous sin, to emphasize the enormity of it. This is why the Prophet ﷺ said, if you see the matter very clearly, just like you see the sun, then give your testimony. Otherwise, do not. So if you're testifying something, be very, very, very clear of what you have said. And if you are not clear, then say, I don't know. I'm not sure. The author said to procrastinate paying one's debt when it is due and when one is able. So the explanation, this is an enormous sin, and it is mentioned among the sins of the tongue because the one who does it promises to pay the debt, and then he does not. Then he promises to pay it, then he does not. So this is why it is counted among the sins of the tongue. So if the time of paying debt is due, the person who has to pay it has enough money to pay it, and the one who deserves it wants it, but despite that, he does not pay the debt, rather he delays doing that, or he abstains from doing it, then this is an enormous sin. As the Prophet ﷺ said, which means the one who is able to pay back his debt after it is due and he does not do it, so he delays it while the lender wants it, he commits a sin by that, and as a consequence, it is permissible to warn against him. So it's permissible to tell the people, do not deal with this person, he does not pay back his debts. And it's permissible for the ruler to punish him in the proper punishment in this case. So there's a point that the teacher wanted to make clear here, and he said sometimes the debt is due and the person owns a house, an apartment, a piece of land, has a car, a refrigerator, a TV, a radio, some furniture that is not necessary, but he doesn't have cash to pay back the debt. And the debt is due. The lender wants his debt back, and despite his situation, he does not pay the debt back. Why? Because he says he does not have the cash. Even if he does not have cash, he needs to sell the car. He can sell the house. He sells shares of his house. If he has shares, he sells shares of the land. He sells the fridge. He sells the TV. He sells the objects at the market price. So he can't say you have to wait until I have enough cash without selling anything, or wait until the end of the month. I will save a little amount and then set aside, and then maybe in 2 years I'll have enough money to pay you back. He cannot say that. So such a person, he needs to pay back the money, even if he has objects to sell. He can sell them. The author said to curse a Muslim. So the explanation, it's narrated in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which means to curse a Muslim is committing an enormous sin. Except, of course, in the case when it is permissible religiously to curse the Muslim or damn him. The Prophet ﷺ said, which means to damn a Muslim is similar to killing him. That is, as killing him is as an enormous sin as to damn him, which this means cursing or damning a Muslim is an enormous sin. So despite what we said, the Prophet said, which means, oh Allah, if I curse, if I insult any Muslim or damn him, that is because apparently he deserved that. So the Prophet did not know the unseen. And if he, this Muslim, deserves that damning, and I did it while truly he did not deserve it, meaning I did it unrightfully, then then Allah forgive him. So from this hadith it is understood that insulting the Muslim or damning him sometimes is permissible. So the scholars mentioned a few examples for that. One example is if a Muslim is committing an enormous sin in front of the people openly, and you believe that if you damn him, he will stop doing this enormous sin. The scholars said in this case it is permissible to damn him. Some scholars said it is permissible to damn anyone except if it is known that this damned one will die as a blasphemer. Sorry, okay, so let me just read that again. Some scholars said it is not permissible to damn anyone except if it is known that this damned one will die as a blasphemer. They said like Iblis. It is known that he is going to die as a blasphemer. So they said it's permissible for them, for people, to damn Iblis. But to them, someone who we do not know that is going to die as a blasphemer, it is not permissible to damn him. And this is a weak saying. The reliable saying is the first saying, that in some cases it is permissible to damn a Muslim, even a Muslim, right? So some cases it is permissible to damn a Muslim, even if you do not know how his ending will be, because the hadith I've mentioned and other hadiths also, such as the hadith who wanted to have sexual intercourse with his wife, and if she abstains without an excuse, then the angels damn her until the morning. Right? This is a sahih hadith. It is also prohibited to damn the person when the angels wouldn't do that. The scholar said it is not permissible to damn someone except if we know that he is going to die a blasphemer. They thought the meaning of damning is for one to be deprived of the mercy of Allah, so i.e. blasphemy. So they thought that damning equals blasphemy, and that's why you can only do it to a blasphemer. Right, this is what they said. In Arabic language, the meaning of damn, it's translated to English as someone being away from goodness. So it does not mean to be deprived from the mercy of Allah. And the blasphemer is the one that is deprived from the mercy of Allah after he dies, right? That's the meaning of Ar-Rahim. He is only merciful to the Muslims after death and not merciful to the disbelievers after death, right? Ar-Rahman is the name of Allah, and He is merciful to the Muslims and the non-Muslims while being alive. The author said to mock or utter what harms a Muslim. So, explanation, it's haram to belittle a Muslim, like to address any word that harms this Muslim unrightfully. Like if someone harms a Muslim by making a sign, that is also prohibited. Or by an act, that's all prohibited. So to mock and utter what harms a Muslim, obviously that can be giving someone names, naming them, calling like fat and ugly, or to someone who's walking in a particular way, and someone mocks the way that they are walking or talking, for example, or by their face without even saying anything. This is also haram. So to mock and even say whatever hurts a Muslim. The author said to lie about Allah and His Messenger. Explanation. This is among the sins of the tongue, and if you remember in the past session, we talked about how when lying, uh, we talked about this lying in general. So there's no difference in opinion with the scholars that lying about Allah and the Prophet is an enormous sin. The Prophet ﷺ said, which means lying about me is not like lying about anyone else. The one who lies about me, let him propose for himself a seat in hellfire. That is, that he's going to be tortured in hellfire. The author said to make a false claim. So, explanation among the sins of the heart is for one to make a false claim. Like to claim that he lent so and so such amount of money while he did not do that. And so he starts asking this person to pay him when he does not deserve for him. Like he can't be saying that. So, we mentioned before how severe it is to make a false testimony. Why? Because making a false testimony makes one acquire what one does not deserve, or deprives one from what he deserves. So the same thing applies when making a false claim. And so this is an enormous sin. The author said to divorce one's wife while she is menstruating, or during a period of purity in which one has had sexual intercourse with her. And this type of divorce is called bid'i. So the explanation. We said it is important to know the judgment of the actions a person wants to do before they engage in doing the action. Divorce is one of those areas. Not every divorce is permissible. Sometimes it is prohibited to divorce one's wife while she is on her menses. And if she is not in her menses, rather, she is now in a period of cleanliness, if he has sexual intercourse with her during this period of cleanliness, it's prohibited for him to divorce her during this period of cleanliness. So if he wants to divorce her, he waits until she menstruates. Then she stops her menses, and then during the period of cleanliness, he divorces her before having sexual intercourse with her. That is, again, without having sexual intercourse with her during the period of cleanliness. Why is that? Because let's say a man has sexual intercourse with his wife, and this is obviously halal, but and then he divorces her without the menses coming in, she might be pregnant. And if he divorces her um, during this time, she becomes pregnant. Um, the divorce still takes place, but he might regret it. He might regret divorcing her, and there might be some more complications, some more drama, more problems if this happens. So again, what we mentioned before, this type of divorce is prohibited. It's haram. But if it is done, the divorce takes place. So if the husband divorced his wife during her menses, the divorce takes place. He is simple for that, but again, it takes place. So among the deviances of the Wahhabis is they say that divorcing one's wife during the menses does not take place. And the Wahhabi leader, he said that the divorce is not valid. If one divorces his wife during her menses, Ibn Taymiyyah claimed that this is not a valid divorce. He went against the rules of the religion. He deviated from what the companions of what the Prophet ﷺ came with. He breached the consensus of the scholars, and he did not care. Not only in this case, but in other cases. And if other people, they follow this rule, what Ibn Taymiyyah says, then they are still divorced. And if they say, oh, if they would basically be committing zina, right? If they continue and take what Ibn Taymiyyah says, they're committing zina because the divorce takes place. So that means that the wife is haram on you. And for you to take back the wife again, she has to wait for the iddah, and then you have to renew the contract, or maybe sometimes make a new contract, and she has to be your wife again before you have sexual intercourse with her. But if someone just takes this rule, these people are committing zina. So I know a lot of people have said, could you call scholars? Could you call, internet influencers? That's what we want to call them. That, oh, you didn't know, it's okay. This is not true. This is not a true statement. And they say it's okay for you not to learn. Like ignorance is bliss. Ignorance is um is a way for you not to acquire sin. This is not true because then people would make an excuse not to learn the knowledge. They would do whatever they want to do, and they would say, "Oh, I didn't know," right? This is not how Islam operates. This is more like of how the Christians really operate, but this is not how the Muslims operate. And there's evidence in the Quran too that says, before you engage into anything, look at what Allah said, look what the Prophet ﷺ said. Okay. So the author said to utter the dahar, like to say to one's wife, you are for me like my mother, meaning I do not want to copulate with you, just as I do not copulate with my mother. If one does not divorce immediately after saying this, one is obligated to fill an expiation, which is to free a Muslim slave who has no defects. If unable to fast 2 consecutive lunar months, and if unable to feed 64 Muslims 60 months. So the explanation. This is one of the sins of the tongue. In the era of ignorance, this statement was considered a divorce. Then Allah revealed to the Prophet ﷺ that just saying this is not considered a divorce. It is not permissible for the husband to say that to his wife. So if someone says to his wife, even after divorcing her 1 or 2 times, that this is a divorce, after which he can bring her back to her iddah, and the iddah is not done yet, So you are to me like my mother, meaning I do not have sexual intercourse with you, like I do not have that, like I do not have that with my mother. Then one commits the sin of dihar. So the same rule applies if one says to his wife, "You are for me like my sister," with the same meaning. Or like you are for me like the hand of my sister, the chest of my sister, the back of my sister, the back of my mother, my grandmother. The same rule applies in all cases. So the husband, after saying this statement, he has two paths. The husband divorces his wife immediately after uttering this statement, and or he does not do that. So he either divorces her, so he would say something like, "You are to me like my mother's, like you are to me like my mother, you are divorced." Or he doesn't do anything, or he just says the statement and does absolutely nothing. So if he divorces immediately after that statement, then he has to repent from the sin of saying that statement, and she is divorced. If he does not divorce her immediately after uttering the statement, then he has to pay an expiation. Even if he divorces her after 1 hour, after 2 hours, after 3 hours, or after 15 minutes, if he does not divorce her immediately after uttering that statement, an expiation is due on him. So the expiation is to free a Muslim slave, male or female, adult or not, who is free from the defects that affects the ability of working. For example, if the slave lost his or her hair, it's valid to set them free, him or her free, because losing hair does not affect the ability of working. On the other hand, if a slave is affected with the defect with something that prevents him from moving his hand, this affects his ability or her ability to work. If one does not have a slave but has enough money to buy one and set the slave free, he has to do that. If he cannot set a slave free, then one has to fast 2 consecutive lunar months. So it's not 60 days, right? 2 consecutive lunar months. And that might be less than 60 days because a lunar month can be 29 days and 29 days, 29 days, 30 days, 30 days, 30 days. So you have three possibilities of what it could be. So if he breaks his fast the day before the last day is due, so let's say 2 days before the 2 months end, then he has to repeat the fasting from the beginning. So it's as if he did not fast. He doesn't pick up, and let's say if he has to fast 60 days and he stops the last 2 days, he doesn't just fast 2 more days. He has to start over again and um, fast 2 lunar months consecutively. If he is old, right? If he is, his body is with sickness. If he cannot fast 2 consecutive months, then in this case, he gives 60 mud of the common food, staple food of the town to 60 different poor Muslims. He gives to each one, that is one poor Muslim, one mud in that particular area. In Philadelphia, for example, wheat is the staple food. In other areas of like India or China, it's rice. In other areas, it could be corn. So it depends on the most common staple food for that area. So if he gathers 60 people at once and he brings 60 muds of wheat in one container and he tells them, "I give this, that is all of you, this amount of wheat, this is enough and this is valid." It is not valid to give one poor person 60 muds, even if he does that in 60 different days. Each day he gives him one mud to the same person. This is not valid. They need to be 60 different poor people. If he cannot fast, if he cannot set a slave free, if he cannot distribute the food, then he waits until he can do one of those three matters, which means it is still due on him. He just has to wait until he meets one of those three conditions. If his situation changes for him to be able to execute one of those three expectations. So the author said to commit mistakes when reciting the Quran, whether or not those mistakes change the meaning. So the explanation. There's a part of the Quran that each and every accountable Muslim has to recite it properly. It's an obligation on each and every accountable Muslim to know how to recite it, and it is the Fatiha. So for the rest of the Quran, it's a communal obligation upon the Muslims to recite it properly. That is, if some of the people in the community learn how to recite the Quran properly, it does not mean the whole world. It just means some of them in that community, then the others in that community are not sinful. If one does not learn how to recite the Quran properly, and as a consequence, he commits mistakes when he's reciting the Quran, he is sinful for that. And it does not matter if he commits mistakes that change the meaning or does not change the meaning. So before reciting the Quran, one needs to learn how to recite it properly without committing mistakes. Some people, because they do not learn where it is an obligation to stretch a letter, they don't do it. And sometimes it's haram to stretch a letter, and they do it. And so they are sinful by that. So, as for the hadith narrated by Al-Bukhari and others that states the one that is difficult for him to recite the Quran gets more reward than the one who recites the Quran, then the one whom reciting the Quran for him is easier. So, this hadith does not mean that the person recites while committing mistakes, and despite that, he gets more reward. It means some people it's more difficult for them that they need to put more effort to recite properly. And they do it. They put that extra effort to recite properly. Those people, they get more reward for that than the ones who it is easier for them to recite the Quran and they do it properly. Right, for the example, I'm literally thinking of anybody who did not grow up speaking Arabic, for example, like an English convert, American convert. So it's harder for them to pronounce the letters and make sure that they are using the throat letters properly. And even some Arabs who know how to speak Arabic, or sometimes their Arabic is mixed in with a different language. So like the Moroccans, I think, have, or maybe it's Algerians, they have French with their Arabic. Um, so they don't necessarily know how to make the exits proper for the Quran. It's 100 times still easier for them to do that than the American who has never used the throat letters, for example, but it's still hard on them. And they still get reward if they have, a teacher with them. So this is what it means that this is what that hadith means. So it does not mean to pervert or to make mistakes of the Book of Allah with yeah, so you don't make mistakes. It does not mean that it's okay for you to make mistakes and you'll get more reward. That's not what it means. This hadith also means that a teacher would be with that person correcting their mistakes. They don't learn from an audio alone, or they don't learn from a book. A teacher will be with them. Sometimes when you tell a person, like, don't recite the Quran without learning, they bring up this hadith because they misunderstood it. A person needs to learn how to pronounce the Arabic letters from their proper exits in the mouth, when to stretch and when to not stretch, in a way that he will be safe from sinning while reciting Quran. Again, the best way to do this, you have to have a teacher. You're not allowed to learn by yourself. Because that's not even how the Prophet ﷺ, he did not learn the Quran by himself. So this is why if one learns one or two or three surahs from the Quran, this is all that he can recite properly, then let him recite only those surahs. That is, of course, he needs to learn Al-Fatiha for the validity of his prayer. If he does not do that, he recites the whole Quran with error, without a teacher, he is putting effort without reward. So let him recite what he learns to get the reward. As for the Fatiha, if one is able to learn, he can learn. There is someone to teach him, and he can pronounce the letters. Like he doesn't have a defect that prevents him from pronouncing those letters. So he can learn, and despite that, he does not learn, then he needs to make up all those prayers that he missed because he did not learn how to recite the Fatiha properly. Which means if someone recites Al-Fatiha with mistakes, in a way that Al-Fatiha is not valid, his prayer is not valid. And we went through that earlier in the section of prayer. So if he prays for 10 years without learning how to recite Al-Fatiha properly, and because of that, the Fatiha is not valid, then he needs to make up all those prayers because he was able to learn and he fell short in that. Al-Fatiha is a requisite. It's an integral for the validity of the prayer. So this is why he needs to make up all those prayers. The author said, the one who is solvent to beg. The explanation. If one is solvent, it is a sin for him to beg. This does not mean standing at the corner to beg only. If one is solvent, he has enough money or he is able to work. He can find the job to support himself to fulfill his basic needs, but he does not do that and instead he begs. In this case, one is sinful. So if one comes to his friend, his relative, to someone else, and if he meets someone on the street and he tells him, give me this, give me that, give me $10, give me $100, with the intention of begging, this is haram. This is sinful. The Prophet ﷺ said the solvent one or the one who is able to work is prohibited from begging. Here, this is different if you are like asking a friend, hey, lend me like $10 or like pay this for me, please. You're not, the intention is not to beg. The intention is like, can you cover this for me? Can you get this can you give this for me for a gift? Like, can you have my back? So this is not the intention here is not begging. This is something that you do with friends. Okay, so we're at the end of section where the the teacher said the most enormous sin after blasphemy is unjustly killing. So they are similar in the meaning that both of them are enormous sins, but they are not equal. Allah Ta'ala said in the Quran, which means, O Muhammad, say I am a human just like you. But I get the revelation from Allah Ta'ala. So everyone among us knows that the Prophet ﷺ is the son of Abdullah. His mother is Amina, and she got pregnant with him and she gave birth to him. We all know that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is among the offsprings of Adam. So he's created from many of his father and his mother, just like the rest of us. So it's not permissible to say that the Prophet Muhammad is light. What the literal meaning that his body is formed from light. Al-Bukhari narrated that one time he fell from a horse, so his thigh was affected, and he stayed for a certain period of time to recover. So he rested to recover. So the light is not hurt by that. And we also know that in one battle, he lost his tooth. It was broken. And that the light, it doesn't get broken by stuff like that. So here by light, it means he enlightened the path for us. And of course, salam, he is not a physical light. If someone is learning Quran, he sits with the teacher until he masters the recitation of the surah properly. After that, he can practice alone. No need for him to sit with his teacher. If one prayed as a follower without reciting the Fatiha, according to some scholars, his prayer is valid. His prayer is valid. So if he goes according to their saying, he does not have to make up that prayer, even if at that time he did not learn Al-Fatiha. If the husband divorces his wife while she is in her iddah, so if he divorces her again a second time, the divorce is counted, so it's valid because she is still in the iddah. The iddah is not over, so it is counted as a second divorce. If the woman is wearing tight clothes that shows her figure but is still covered, this is disliked. Same thing for men, but in the case of men, it's disliked a little less. The prayer is valid, but the person loses reward by doing that. Sallallahu wasallam wa barak ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Let us say tahleel. La ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Barakallahu fikum. And if you guys have any questions, you guys can also always DM me or text me. Okay, barakallahu fikum. Assalamu alaikum.